So my name is Melissa Davis, and I'm the Senior Marketing Officer for Alcohol Beverage Services. So first and foremost, thank all of you all for being here today. We started our virtual seminar series about 2 months ago now. This is our second to last in what I guess I would call our spring series. We're going to take a little summer vacation after next week, and then we're going to come back in the fall with some more of these sessions once the weather gets a little cooler and things like that. But a huge shout out to Chris Rufus, Michele Walsh from Pernod Ricard and Jameson today. Just super excited to have you guys here and learn about some of the special marks within Jameson. So Chris is our market manager from Pernod. So I am going to turn it over to him to do some introductions.
Thank you, Melissa. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Rufus. I am the market manager for Pernod Ricard for Montgomery County, Washington, D.C., and the state of Maryland. A little background, Pernod Ricard is the second biggest spirit supplier in the world. We have brands such as Jameson, Absolute, Glenlivet, Chivas Regal, Beefeater, Avion Tequila, and a ton of other brands, Jefferson's Bourbon. And we are fortunate enough to have ambassadors that are highly skilled in all of our brands. And the best ambassador program that we have, I think that might be in the entire industry, is Jameson's. Jameson's program has been, the knowledge I have gotten over the past 11 years that I've worked for the brands has all come from our ambassadors. And Michele is our current ambassador, and she probably forgot more about whiskey than I'll ever know. So, we're gonna present some really nice stuff to you today. I will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, please send it into the chat, and we'll take a break every 5 minutes or so, just to make sure we can get any questions answered. So if you have any questions, just put them right in the chat, and I'm gonna pass it over to Michele Walsh right now.
Great. Well, first of all, hello to everybody. Seriously though, thanks for taking the time to, I suppose, listen and find out a bit more about Jameson today. I'm going to share my screen with you guys anyway, so let's just make sure we were, it says host disabled participants screen sharing. Let's see. Well, in the meantime, anyway, we'll try and figure that out, but I'll just give you guys a bit of background to myself. So, my name's Michele Walsh, and as Chris said, I'm a Jameson Whiskey Brand Ambassador. So with the Brand Ambassador program, we're all actually from Ireland. So I'm from Dublin, but I've been over here in the States now nearly 2 years, and I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee. So I'm chatting to you guys here from my East Nashville apartment. But I do market visits, coming to visit different cities and different states. So I got to go to DC just really in January and met Chris, and we did a few events down there. So yeah, I guess we'll get started. Everything's good there. We can see the screen. Little thumbs up if you can. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Melissa. Today, I'm just going to give you guys a bit of a background, first of all, on Jameson whiskey as a whole. And then we're going to go through the two different Castmates, followed by the Whiskey Maker series, which is more kind of on the higher end of our products. I don't actually have the bottles with me today, but if you guys do, by all means, sip away. Let's do a sip and learn. So first of all, as I said, a bit of history and heritage. Jameson whiskey basically went through a bit of a roller coaster ride from starting off going very well. Then we entered a bit of a difficult stage, and then to see what it is today. So like Jameson is huge. Jameson is over 80% of the world's Irish whiskey sales. And if you have 4 bottles of Irish whiskey lined up in front of you, statistically, 3 of those are going to be Jameson. So obviously, it's huge. And our whiskey is made in Middleton, whether it's the Jameson range, the Middleton range, the Green Spot, Yellow Spot, the Whiskey Maker series, or Redbreast. So it's all made in one distillery, which we take a lot of pride in. So it makes sure, highest quality from grain to glass. So this fella here, if you can guess who he is, it's John Jameson, who made Jameson whiskey, the world's #1 Irish whiskey. And one thing that people always find quite surprising, actually, about John is that he's not, in fact, from Ireland. That was something that I kind of blew my mind when I found this out originally. He's actually from Scotland, and back in the 1780s, came over on a ship to Dublin and set up Jameson Distillery in Bow Street. And at the time, Dublin was, say, in a bit of a boom. It was a bustling city. There was a lot of distilleries popping up left, right, and centre. And John Jameson knew that he needed to stand out to make sure that his whiskey was the best. So he was known as being a very fair employer. He gave everyone more kind of wages at the time than anyone else did, made sure the families of all his employees were sorted. And John himself would literally pick the barrels that were used to age the whiskey, and he'd test and make sure that the grain and the barley was of the highest quality. And that really did stand to him. So here we have Middleton Distillery, which, as I said, is where all our whiskey is made today. Originally, Jameson was made in Dublin, and then they decided to move the distillery down to County Cork in Ireland. And if any of you've been to Ireland, you know, wait, can you guys hear me okay? There's not an echo or anything? Okay, Grant, sorry. Just sometimes, I'm sure you guys know at this time with Zoom calls, there can be technical difficulties. But this here is the old Middleton Distillery. And further on in this presentation, I'll show you what it actually looks like today. If any of you guys are ever going over to Ireland, I would highly recommend making a trip down to County Cork and seeing where Jameson is made. I mean, it's very much what you imagine Ireland to be. Fields of green, very picturesque, very, very local. Everyone in Middleton is involved with the distillery. But so by the 1800s, Jameson whiskey was doing amazing. It was sold all over the world, in Africa, Asia. I actually worked for Jameson in Bangkok for a year before I moved to the US. And let me tell you, they drink some serious amount of whiskey. And it was even that way back 200 years ago. But our luck then changed when we got into the 1900s. So first was the Irish independence war from Britain. And that cut off one of our biggest markets, which is the UK. We weren't able to trade with the UK. We weren't able to import in and out of the UK. So that was a huge blow to Irish whiskey, and Jameson in particular. Following on from that, of course, US prohibition. The US is without a doubt the biggest market for Jameson whiskey in the world. I mean, even being a brand ambassador, yes, you go to all different markets. As I said, I was based in Bangkok, but if you get over to the US, you're like, I made it. Like, that's the big market where everyone wants to go, just because whiskey's huge over here and it's just great to work for such a big Irish brand in the US. But as you can imagine, prohibition hugely affected Jameson and all of our whiskey. So whether it's Redbreast, the whiskey makers, Middleton, all of that. And then finally, the next blow was World War II. So we survived through 2 world wars, but really at that stage, Jameson was not looking good. Irish distillers, which is, you know, what produces all our whiskey, we were really on a low point. But then things started to look better. In 1988, Irish Distillers, which is what makes all of our whiskey, was acquired by Pernod Ricard. So that's what we work for today, is Pernod Ricard USA. And this was huge. It gave us the support we needed to really get, you know, liquid lips, people drinking Jameson and all our brands again. So we were acquired in 1988, and then we moved down to Middleton and County Cork. So here we have, that's the Jameson Distillery in Middleton. It's absolutely beautiful. As I said, you have to visit it. But one of the main reasons that they moved down to County Cork was because the water supply that's used to make Jameson whiskey literally flows through the grounds of Middleton Distillery. So we have like a freshwater resource coming from the River Dungorney is what it's called. And also a key ingredient, our barley, is literally grown in the fields all around the distillery, and it's brought freshly every single day to produce the whiskey. So in general, for Jameson and for any whiskey, an Irish whiskey, to legally be Irish, it has to be aged for at least 3 years in barrels, and it has to be made on the island of Ireland. But in general, our whiskey is aged for 5 to 7 years, and that can be a lot higher depending on some of the marks, which we'll go through later when we're doing the Whiskey Maker series. But for Jameson Original, the Castmates, which we'll talk about today, it's aged for 5 to 7 years, and it's triple distilled. So all our whiskey is distilled 3 times to give it that distinct, smooth taste. So that's one thing you'll always notice is the finish is always really smooth, and it's something that we take a lot of pride in. And it's aged in 2 different types of barrels. So we've got our bourbon barrels that literally come from Kentucky. People often ask me at whiskey shows or whiskey trainings, like, is it Jack Daniels? Like, is it the big players? Like, yes, it is. Like, that's not a secret. We want to make sure it comes from, really high quality bourbon whiskey makers. And those barrels are sent over to Ireland literally on a daily basis to age our whiskey and to keep up with the volume. And then also sherry butts that come from Spain, mostly a place called Jerez in Spain. And the bourbon barrels give more of those like kind of sweet flavors like toasted wood, vanilla, and caramel to the whiskey. And then the sherry butts give more what you'd expect really from, say, a sherry wine, like fruity, nutty notes to the whiskey. And again, aged for 5 to 7 years. So first off, we're going to go through the Castmates, and here it is. There's the Jameson Castmates Stout and the Jameson Castmates IPA. And if you haven't tried these before, they really are amazing products. And there's also a very cool story to go behind how they are made. So you'd assume it'd be in a big meeting room and coming up with ideas and, oh, I like that. I see some Keeper's Crows, was it being poured? But basically you'd assume that there's this big master plan behind how they made it. No, very simply, the master of whiskey science for Jameson whiskey was sitting one Friday night in his local bar in County Cork, having a few drinks with his friends. And one of his friends owned a small local craft brewery called Franciscan Well. And he asked the master of whiskey science, listen, could we take 6 empty Jameson barrels that like previously had Jameson whiskey in them, bring them down over to the brewery and age our beer in these barrels, so it'll take on all the flavor profiles of Jameson? And our master was first of all like, absolutely not. I'll be killed if suddenly these barrels disappear. Like once they are in the distillery, they stay there, and that's just it, because we reuse the barrels like for different flavors for different whiskeys. But they had a few more drinks. I'm sure there was a few Guinness drank and definitely a few more Jameson. And by the end of the night, they were trying to come up with the plan how they were going to get these barrels over, that it was a great idea. And in Ireland, we're about 10 years behind the US when it comes to craft beer trends. I mean, like if a very basic normal IPA comes out, people lose their mind. Like when I came over here first, I was like, Jesus, it's crazy. The innovation, all the different products. Like we went to Great American Beer Fest and literally thousands of breweries there. So they gave anyway the barrels to the brewery, and Jameson forgot about it. That was fine. They got on with making their whiskey. And that summer, Franciscan Well launched their craft beer, which was finished in Jameson whiskey barrels. And everyone literally lost their mind over this. They couldn't believe that, such a new innovation, big Jameson whiskey, partnering with a small local brewery, and the beer was sold out in weeks. So Jameson, of course, could see all this happening, and they could see all the publicity they were getting online and everyone saying how amazing the beer was. And they basically just came up with a bit of like ideation of their own and said, okay, well, how about we take back those 6 barrels? So now these barrels have a layer of stout craft beer in them, bring them to the distillery and finish off our whiskey in these barrels. So essentially the exact opposite, flipped it over. Originally, the brewery took the barrels that had Jameson in them, so the beer could have like a whiskey profile to it. And then we took back these stout craft beer barrels and aged our whiskey in them to see if it would have an effect on the flavor profile of our whiskey. So it was only finished off for 3 months, so literally just 12 weeks in these barrels. And when they opened up the barrels, tried the whiskey, they realized it had a completely different flavor profile. So this was the first one to be made, which was the Jameson Castmates Stout Edition. It's aged as usual, same way, finished off in bourbon barrels and sherry casks for 5 to 7 years. And then it's put into a barrel that previously had stout craft beer. So as it says there, on the nose with this one, kind of not what you'd expect for a stout, but it definitely is orchard fruits that you get, like crisp green apples, pears, but to taste, you really get the flavors of that stout craft beer. So slight bit of hops, definitely smooth chocolate, marzipan coming through, and the finish is very long and sweet. Again, those sweet notes that you expect, like chocolate and butterscotch. This is amazing paired with a local stout craft beer. Jameson's all about supporting local breweries as opposed to like playing with the big players in the market. And also, really simple cocktail for this is with soda water and a wedge of orange. It's a really refreshing summer drink. So if you have the chance and you've got a bottle of Jameson Castmates Stout, defo try that out. And also, of course, I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's amazing in an Irish coffee. So all of those are great real ways to utilize Jameson Castmates Ipa. But great drink. And again, guys, I can't see the questions. I know Chris is going through, but if any questions on any of this, please ask away at any point.
We have one question so far. And David asks, are the same stills used to create all the different expressions, Jameson, Redbreast, etc.?
Yes, the same stills are used. If you ever visit the distillery, it literally is just this. We have our 3 big faint pot stills, and then also there's a copper pot still as well, which is used, but it's the same all over for Jameson and any of our Redbreast, Green Spot, any of the higher range as well.
The second question, I don't want to anger you with this, okay?
Go for it. Let's go.
Johnny asks, I know this is controversial, but can you comment on Irish whiskey being older than Scotch?
Well, good question. It is. Scotch whiskey is said to be made before Irish whiskey, but do you know what? We let them have that one because they gave us John, and that's how we made our whiskey in the end. So yes, Scottish whiskey has been around for longer. But
Okay.
listen, we got John Jameson out of it.
Another question, how many times are the barrels used for aging?
Is this for the Castmates or just in general?
I think I would say in general. Arthur asked that question, but I mean, yes, in general.
Well, our master cooper said that it's used up to 15 times, and then it's never wasted. It's always then used for a different product. That's first fill bourbon or second fill bourbon. But up to the point of 15 times, then they change out the barrels. But obviously, it has to be consistent.
I can answer this next question from David. Red Spot is available in the U.S. Montgomery County did get an allocation of it, so you could try, but it's highly allocated. They only got 5 6-packs. There's only 5 6-packs for Maryland, 5 6-packs for Montgomery County, and 10 6-packs for DC. So yes, it was. Next question from Jared. Is peat used in the drying process?
No. In the drying process, it's only like hot, clean air from a kiln. And that's one of the main reasons why our whiskey has more of that like smoothness, obviously. And then Scotch is more peaty because in their drying process, they use peat to dry the barley.
Okay. James asks, do the different expressions have different recipes, ages?
So you mean like Jameson Original versus Castmates and all that type of thing?
Doesn't specify. Yes.
So for Jameson Original and the 2 Castmates, they have the same recipe, but with the Black Barrel, it's different. Black Barrel has more grain whiskey in it and small batch pot still, so they're different. And then also when we go into the Whiskey Maker series, they all have a completely different like production recipe for each of them, which we can go through as well.
And then Arthur has a follow-up question. What happens to the barrels eventually? They are somewhat collectible in the U.S., but how about in Ireland? Do they, I guess, do they give them out to the 2 accounts for display, or?
That's actually a really good question. A portion of them are sent to Cuba for Havana rum because that's part of our portfolio. And then the barrels that are, the other half that actually are finished are distributed to different bars all over the city. And like I even see it at home, there's huge competition between Jameson and say Teelings and Tullamore Dew trying to offer better products so you could get personalized the name of your bar on them and all that type of thing because I mean they're just everywhere. But yeah, it's distributed out to accounts.
And then I'm going to follow up with something said earlier, and then we can move on. We do have a partnership locally with DC Brow Brewery. And we have sent them barrels for the past 2 years, Jameson barrels, which they aged 2 different stouts in the first year. Last year they did a stout and a Imperial IPA, which was very high proof. And this year they just received their barrels and they're working on their next batch. So keep your eyes open. I know that Montgomery County took some in last year. I hope they took it in again this year. So keep your eyes open for that. Their stouts, all the beers that they made were fantastic. And yes, I've seen the barrels come in. I've seen them come in off the truck, and they thought there was a mistake because all the barrels said Jack Daniels on them. And I had to tell them, no, guys, that's how they sent them. They think that Jameson gets them and paints them all nice and pretty. No, they don't care. They just wanted to put the whiskey in it. So, so that was that. Two more questions really quick. What Cuban rums are aged in Jameson barrels? That would be Havana Club. Havana Club is owned with partnership with the Cuban government and Pernod Ricard. Until the embargo is lifted, we will not have Havana Club made in Cuba in this country. There is another Havana Club made in Puerto Rico that has no association, but the Havana Club from Cuba will be in this country if the embargo is ever lifted. And lastly, what's Jameson Black Barrel? We have it at the local DC Costco.
That's a great question. Jameson Black Barrel. Actually, I have a bottle here, so I'll show you that. I'll grab it quickly.
So I could tell you that Jameson Black Barrel was brought in to the local Costco for St. Patrick's Day for a promotion. It was a kind of like a one-off, and it's very difficult. I mean, it's very difficult for them to take something in and keep it in because they have such limited space for spirits. So depends on how it sells, and if it stays, it'll probably be back next year. If they're out of it now, then it'll be back next year for St. Patrick's.
Yeah, and that's the Jameson Black Barrel there, guys. If you haven't tried it, I'd highly recommend. It's actually my favorite of any of the more like lower price point products. It's Jameson whiskey. So obviously our whiskey is finished off in bourbon barrels and sherry casks, but with the Jameson Black Barrel, the bourbon barrels are given a double charring when they get to our distillery to really bring out those more intensified bourbon flavors. So it's definitely for a bourbon drinker. It's aged for slightly longer, 8 to 12 years. You can see it's a clear glass to kind of show the darker color of the whiskey. But it's definitely like bartender's choice, great for cocktails and also great for just like sipping neat on the rocks. What a fantastic present for around, say, holidays like Thanksgiving, Christmas. This always does so well because it really has that more of like premiumness to it and tastes amazing. So we can go through that one another time as well. I'm happy to come back and talk to any of the other products.
And that is all the questions, and we can move on.
I agree. And guys, thanks for the questions. It's nice having an interactive training. So that's the Jameson Castmates Stout. So as I said, it's just Jameson whiskey, but it's finished off in a stout craft beer barrel for 3 months. And that really brings out those stout flavors. And since it's actually really good to note, since Jameson Castmates was launched in the US, Jameson Original is the #1 Irish whiskey in the US. Castmates is now the #2 ahead of any of our competitors. So like I think that just blows my mind to show the sheer volume and how well that product has done because it's genuinely great. So they launched that first, the Castmates, and then the IPA was about 3 years ago. So basically they saw how well the stout went down and then decided, okay, let's look into other craft beer trends, what will work well as well. And obviously, I mean, if you think of any like lighter stout or lighter craft beer, IPA comes to mind. But I've noticed when I'm doing whiskey tastings with the IPA, people are very kind of apprehensive and say, oh no, I don't drink IPA craft beer, so I'm not going to like that. Like I'll smell it, but I don't even want to drink it. And I'm like, no, it doesn't taste like an IPA. It's very much still authentic Jameson whiskey, but it just has those hints of an IPA. And also when you see the words IPA, you automatically assume Indian Pale Ale, of course, but it's actually not. It's an Irish Pale Ale, which is way less hoppy. So that's often why people have the issues with it is the hops, but it's a lot less hoppy. So again, that's the green bottle is the IPA, and then the stout is the much kind of darker colored one. But the IPA is exactly what you'd expect. Much more on the citrus side, a lot of grapefruit coming through. You get those hops a bit more, but again, they're very subtle. And then a slight bit of nuttiness as well. But again, to taste with this one, much more of those floral light, citrus tones are coming through. And it's got that really long lingering finish with those hops kind of on the back end. But this is great as well, obviously neat on the rocks, paired with any IPA craft beer, or to be honest, any light beer in general. I've seen all the crazy developments with all these different flavored beers at the moment, and it really works well, especially with any that are like grapefruits or citrus notes. Very easy cocktail for this as well for summer sipping is with tonic water and a wedge of lemon is a really refreshing drink for this one. And in general, for all of our Jameson Castmates, it's all produced in County Cork in Ireland. 2 years ago now, Jameson actually brought a brewery in County Cork to keep up with the volume for Jameson Castmates. So it's all produced in Ireland, except for when Chris said we have our partnerships with local breweries in the US, which is pretty cool as well to be a part of. So that's the Castmates IPA. Again, same thing, Jameson original for 5 to 7 years and finished off for 3 months in a barrel that previously had an IPA in it. So next up, we're getting on to the higher end products here, which I love to talk through, the Jameson Whiskey Maker series. So I suppose I'll just give you a bit of a background to the Whiskey Maker series. Our master distiller, master cooper, and master blender all got the opportunity to make their own whiskey. So Jameson came to them, and you know, their life is Jameson. They're craftsmen since they were 19, 20 years old working at the distillery, and they produce our whiskey. So Jameson kind of wanted to give them a bit of a thank you and say, listen, you've done so much for our whiskeys. We want to give you the opportunity now to make your own whiskey. And they all, of course, made their whiskey focusing on what their trade is. So the master cooper is all about the barrels. Master distiller is all about the distillate of the whiskey. And then the master blender, of course, is about the blend and making sure it's perfect every single time. So first up is Bryon Nation. He's our master distiller. And of course, his whiskey is the distiller's safe. So one thing that's important to note on all of the Whiskey Maker series is they've all named their whiskey after their favorite tool that they use on day-to-day, you know, producing whiskey. And you can see on the bottles, I'm not sure if you have a bottle in front of you, but each of their fingerprints are on the bottle, just to give it more of like you know, personalized touch. So the distiller's safe is actually the youngest out of the three for the aging process of the whiskey, and that's because Bryon, our master distiller, wanted to focus on the actual distillate of the whiskey, because obviously when you know, bring in different types of barrels and aging for longer, the whiskey takes on the flavor profile of what was in the barrel, or it takes on the color of what was previously in the barrel. So for the distiller's safe, it's actually just aged for 5 to 7 years, so like Jameson Original, but it's all focusing on the distillate, so only aged in bourbon barrels, which is very rare for Irish whiskey. But that's because Bryon didn't want the whiskey to take on a darker color or too much flavor. He just wanted to focus on the pure distillation of the whiskey. Of course, it's distilled 3 times, like all our whiskey. Much more, this is definitely the lighter of the three. So like with the distiller's safe, you're gonna get like pear, green apple, a bit of cinnamon flavors coming through, and barley sugar. All of these I would highly recommend just sipping neat or on the rocks. I wouldn't be mixing any of these in with cocktails or ginger ale or anything like that. It really just is a whiskey to be appreciated, because it's what the master literally came up with as his own whiskey, which I think is amazing, even for them. I mean, I've met them, and it's crazy when you're sitting at a company dinner or something like that, and they're sipping on their own whiskey that they made. So it definitely feels like you're a bit starstruck meeting celebrities. So again, that's Bryon Nation, who's our master distiller. And then next up is Billy Layton, who is our master blender. And actually, I'll just go back for a second just to remind you, the distiller's safe, and you can see it there in the little picture. It's basically just a little contraption that's used to place all the distillates in there, and then Bryon tests the distillate of the whiskey to make sure it's perfect every time. But he used that as his favorite tool, because without that, he wouldn't be able to actually ensure that it's consistent every single time making the whiskey. So there's Billy anyway, our master blender. And if you see there, he's holding a tool in his hand, and that's called the dog. And that is where the name comes for, the blender's dog. And that tool is literally used, it's put inside the barrel to test the blend of the whiskey. So for Billy's whiskey, he wanted to make sure it was the perfect blend. And this is the blend of pot still, grain, and also malted whiskey, aged in bourbon barrels and sherry casks for 5 to 12 years. So different blends, different times in the barrels, but in general, 5 to 12 years with 3 different blends of whiskey. So this one is quite complex. There's definitely a lot of flavor coming through. More on the sweet side, you're going to get milk chocolate, butterscotch, and toffee, and also kind of a bit of like a spiciness to it as well. Yeah, so that's the blender's dog. So again, you want it to all be about the perfect balance between the blend of the whiskey. So as you can see, they're all focusing on their area of being a master, their expertise. So that's the blender's dog. And again, neither on the rocks is the best way to drink any of the whiskey makers series. They're also, important to note, 43% ABV, so they've got a higher alcohol percentage than what you'd expect from, say, Jameson Original or Castmates Black Barrel, any of those. They're all normally 40%. So next one here is Mr. J.R. Buckley, who is our Master Cooper. And I'm not sure if any of you guys have met him before. He is just amazing. He comes over to the US for Great American Beer Fest or certain whiskey dinners. They fly him in. He flies all over the world. Jer's in his 60s and he's been working for Jameson since he was a young boy. He's a 5th generation Master Cooper for the brand. So it's literally been his family history is all around Jameson. Like, he grew up on the grounds of Middleton Distillery, which I think is just amazing. And now he's a bit of a celebrity and he's traveling the world and meeting all of us brand ambassadors, and we have to host him. And he does all these different whiskey shows and whiskey dinners, and he's just amazing. But for Jer, his whiskey obviously is the Cooper's Crows. And here it is. And his tool, the Crows, is used to mend the wood in the barrels to make sure that there's no cracks and no leaks, so that we can use the barrels. And of course they don't leak when they're aging our whiskey in them. But because he's the Master Cooper, of course his drink is going to be all about the barrels. So it's going to be about the amount of time the whiskey spends in the barrels and the types of barrels that are used to age the whiskey. So the Cooper's Crows, even though all of these 3 are line price, the whiskey in Cooper's Crows is aged for 12 to 16 years in 4 different types of barrels. So it's first fill bourbon, second fill bourbon, virgin American oak, which is never really used in Irish whiskey, and then also sherry butts as well. So this one is very robust, a lot of flavors, a lot of kind of like very compact, this one, but it's literally liquid gold. It's my favorite out of the 3. Maybe I'm being biased because I love J.R. Buckley, but it really is fantastic. With this one, definitely you get like toasted oak, vanilla, a bit of cinnamon, and even like gingerbread flavors coming through, and then a bit of spiciness as well, coming from the sherry casks. So as I said, all line price, definitely more of a whiskey to be appreciated, sipped slowly, and really to hear the story behind them, because I often think when you see these just, you know, sitting on a shelf in a liquor store or in a bar, you don't really know what they are. But it's very personal. It's each of our masters telling their own story and making a whiskey that they feel tells that story for them, which I think is it's great. It really is. But that's the 3 out of the whiskey makers. If we were all in person, we could do a cheers and have a drink together, but unfortunately we're not. But I do have a cheers that our Master Cooper here, J.R. Buckley, always uses. So if you have a drink in front of you, raise it and we'll say J.R.'s cheers. So his cheers is, may the roofs above us not fall in, and may the friends around us not fall out. And of course, he always finishes it off with saying sláinte, which is Irish for cheers, which actually translates in Irish to good health, which is a bit ironic as you're shooting Irish whiskey. But yeah, that is that, guys. That's the presentation. If you guys have questions, I hope you do. And if it's, I'm sure you guys do because I can see the notifications, but please ask away and I'd be delighted to answer anything. But guys, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me.
So we have one question that was, can caramel coloring be legally added to Irish whiskey?
No, all Irish whiskey is natural in colouring.
And will Crested ever be available in the US?
That's a very good question. I've actually asked that question myself, but I think they like to have Crested as in the distillery, it's produced in small batch. And to be honest, I think they use it as a way to get Americans over and into the distillery to actually see it all in action.
Yeah, because you got to get your name on the bottle too. So,
Yeah.
but somebody asks, do you have a distillery cat?
A distillery cat, that's a really good question, because back in the day, they used to actually, back in say the 1780s, they used to have distillery cats in Bow Street because there was so much like mice back 300 years ago, and they were there to catch the mice, but there actually is. And I don't have pictures now, but when we went down to visit, Jared Buckley, the master cooper, spends most of his time there in the distillery, and he has a cat, and the cat had kittens when we were visiting the distillery, and it was a big fiasco. And the kittens were all named after different whiskeys.
Okay. Arthur, okay. Someone, I have to go back up. So Johnny asked, can you repeat the toast? But Arthur typed it out for everybody. Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you, Arthur.
Steve B asked, I see Moco stocks a Jameson cold brew. Can you talk about that? And I actually have a bottle of that right here to show you.
Oh, we
so
can talk about that.
If you want to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have a bottle over there, and that's been my favorite drink during quarantine. So what is Jameson cold brew? Very simply, it's Jameson whiskey, so literally Jameson original, that is infused with natural cold brew coffee flavoring. So it has real coffee in it, 100% Arabica coffee beans, from Colombia. And when I first heard they were coming out with this, they always said, like when we did our training in Ireland, like I did a 6-week training down in Middleton when I started working for Jameson. They said that they would never come out with any of these butterscotch or caramel or peanut butter alcohols. And then I heard about Jameson cold brew, and I was like, oh no, it's probably going to be very sweet and like a liqueur, but it really isn't. It's still very much authentic Jameson whiskey that just has like hints. You definitely get that coffee flavor, but hints of it on the back end. It's lower proof, so it's 60 proof, and they kind of made it to really seize like the brunch get together, happy hours, things like that. So it's lower proof, but it's really just to tap into different areas. So yeah, Chris, if you want to add anything else on that for DC market, but yeah, it's Jameson whiskey infused with natural cold brew coffee flavor.
Yeah, so the cold brew was released right before St. Patrick's Day, I think a month before. It's in February, and it launched so well. It was the reception to it was insane. I was fortunate enough to get a bottle, if you can see this, a case actually, a year before that from the original batch of cold brew. So this is what they were selling out of the distillery, and then when they decided to bring it over to the States, they came out, with a 750. This is a 500 CL or 500 milliliter. This is 750 milliliter. But it's been, it's some of the things that they've been doing with it in the bars and restaurants, just in an Irish coffee. It's fantastic. I've had it with cold brew. If you haven't had a cold brew Irish coffee, you haven't lived yet. I'm telling you that right now. They are outstanding, very high powered. But yeah, so that's where the cold brew is right now. Let me see here. We got a lot of questions coming in. Can you say roughly the ratio of malted versus unmalted barley used?
They won't let us enclose that information. Anything to do with the actual production, they won't let us say anything. I know it. There's more malted barley in there than unmalted barley, but yeah, because originally there wasn't actually meant to be any malted barley in the whiskey, but at the time in the 1800s, John Jameson, the British had put a tax on malted barley in Ireland, and he basically added in unmalted barley to bring down the price of production, but realized that gave more of like a spiciness and creamy mouthfeel to the whiskey. So they decided to add it in and keep it, but there's more malted barley, but we can't say the exact amounts.
Sour Bourbon asks, does Moco stock the Blender's Dog, Distiller Safe, and Cooper's Crows? Yes, they do. Arthur says, so you're in Nashville, lots of Tennessee whiskey about? Do you have a brand of American whiskey you like that's at least close to Jameson? Not saying better than Jameson, of course.
That's a question, Arthur. I actually don't usually drink bourbon whiskey because to be honest, in Ireland, people don't really drink bourbon at all. And obviously, I've like tasted it a bit over here, but genuinely, I'm not a bourbon gal. But I use Black Barrel to convert people from bourbon over because it's more that bourbon flavor profile. But yeah, I need to get going on that. I need to visit a few bourbon distilleries when I'm here and do the Kentucky Trail. Yeah, once it's reopened.
Steve B asks, do you like it neat or mixed somehow?
I mean, I never say no to a shot of Jameson, but if I'm socially drinking, I like it with Jameson Original with ginger ale and lime. It's really refreshing. Great drink.
Leslie says that they're currently drinking Crested right now, fondly remembering their October distillery tour in Cork, and thanking you for their presentation.
Oh, thank you. I'm delighted you visited a distillery. That's great.
James said is very tasty. Excellent on vanilla ice cream. Yes, James, very, very good on vanilla ice cream. Johnny said, I want to party with you, Chris. Johnny, I'm telling you right now, you don't want to party with me. Like, that's how marriages end. I've been in the game way too long. I'm very seasoned. One thing that I will point out really quick, and this is kind of funny. I learned this from a former ambassador. What I have right here is a 750 milliliter bottle of Jameson cold brew, right? Same size as a regular bottle of Jameson that you would buy at the store. What I have here is a liter. This is what all the bars use. This is the IPA. The amount of, and if you don't know this, when you're aging barrels, every year a barrel evaporates about 3%. It's called the angel share. And I know most of you probably already know that. Now, the Middleton Distillery and the Rickhouses where they barrel age all the whiskey. This liter bottle right here, the amount of angel share that comes out of that is the equivalent of taking this liter bottle, smashing it on the ground, and doing that every 7 seconds. Which, if you think of how much whiskey that actually is that evaporates every 7 seconds, that's insanity. So, I mean, they're doing their best to keep the production up to make sure we're able to get it right into your mouth. Okay, let me see. We have a couple more questions. I usually only think of Irish coffee when I think of Irish whiskey cocktails, but the ginger ale and lime cocktail sounds great. Can you recommend any other summertime Jameson cocktails?
I'm sure I could send you over a list, but one thing as well to say for the Jameson cold brew, a summer cocktail for that one that they're really pushing, which is fantastic, is with cola and an orange peel. I normally don't drink whiskey and Coke together, but it's a great drink. Then for the original, I mean, ginger ale's great. Obviously, ginger beer, like a mule, is fantastic. And I also like just with Jameson soda water and lime when I'm trying to keep sugar down as well. They're just really simple drinks to do. I mean, I think the whiskey it speaks for itself when you drink it, like not having to get overly sugary and, hiding the actual taste of the whiskey. But
I highly, Jameson is very sweet for me to drink in a cocktail. So I prefer the Jameson Black Barrel, which is good. You can make any classic cocktail with Jameson Black Barrel. It might be one of the most perfect whiskeys to make a classic cocktail with. Old Fashions, Manhattans. I mean, you can do a Blood and Sand. You can do anything with it. But I don't like sweet. I don't like a lot of flavor. I drink everything with soda water. So one of my go-to summer drinks is Jameson Black Barrel and soda. Sometimes I just get a little lemon in there, and that's simple as that. Hold on, we have another question. Are we getting free samples sent to our house, or can we pick them up from the ABS? I'm gonna probably say that's a hard no.
I was gonna say, Chris, I typed a reply in there. I'm with you on the we wish, James. Our laws in Montgomery County are a little different than DC laws. So I know some of you all in DC have been able to do that, but we can't tie complimentary samples to the seminars. That would require some legislative change, but Chris, Pernod Ricard can definitely push for that at the state level.
I could. Is 12-year gone forever?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's why I got a bottle in my cabinet over here that's never gonna get open. there's certain things that if I see, I'm on the hunt for a bottle of Jameson Rarest Vintage.
Good luck.
It could be one of the best whiskeys I've ever tasted. But if I ever see that, I'm buying it. If you see a bottle of Jameson 12 year, I highly recommend you buy it. Let's see here. Well, what's your Irish coffee recipe? I mean, I can tell you what mine is. I would take a cup of brown sugar, a cup of water, throw it in a pot, boil it. All right. Once it comes to a boil, just take it off, let it cool. You have your brown sugar simple syrup. I would just put in probably 2 ounces, well, yeah, depending on the size of the glass, but me, 2 ounces of Jameson cold brew, probably about a half ounce of brown sugar simple syrup. Fill it up with cold brew coffee, and then I would take a heavy cream, put it in, if you have a frother, that's the best way to do it, but if not, you can put it in a shaker, put a little heavy cream in there, shake it up for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and then slowly just drizzle it over the top. You will not have a better cold brew Irish coffee than that, my personal opinion.
Yeah, real cream, no whipped cream. It's all the difference.
So I have a 2007 Rarest Vintage found in Annapolis last year. Good for you. Any other questions, guys? Ladies? Nothing? Well, I think that's it.
It was fun, guys. Thank you. That was great.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great having everybody engaged. We really love that.
Yes, big time. It's all the difference.
Yeah, hopefully we can do another one, when we're after the summer. So, yeah.
Yep. So thank you guys so much, Chris, Michelle. Amazing presentation. And thank you guys, everyone, for joining in and learning some more about Jameson with us. It was awesome. Cheers.
Yeah, guys, thank you. Sláinte. Cheers.